You are listening to the Logos broadcast with Fergus James Murphy. Today I'm in the presence of Eddie Lenihan. Eddie is a Shanachie, which is an Irish title meaning storyteller or historian. Maybe you can correct me on that if I'm wrong. But Eddie lives in Clergy in County Clare. We're sitting here in his house this afternoon. It's the 28th of December 2019. And I can honestly say I don't think I've ever been as excited to do an interview as I have been over the last few weeks about this one with Eddie. So Eddie, thanks a million for accommodating me today and for being willing to do this.
No problem at all.
I want you to take me back to 1999 and the campaign that you were central to when there was a motorway going to be built and it would have interfered with the ferry fort. So
not a fort. Bush.
A bush.
Yeah, the Skeach. It's down there at Latoon, below Ennis, south of Ennis. And it's still there. It's still very much there because of the noise, we'll say, at the time. And it wasn't a campaign. I won't say I'm not a campaigner for anything. And I've always avoided these, as you say, campaigns for one thing and another, because to my mind very often they attract too many hangers-on.
Okay.
Of God only knows what kinds that have too many agendas that you don't know anything about. All I wanted there was that a bush that was a Skeach, a fairy bush, wouldn't be demolished by road building, because I know from what I know about what I've learned from old people that if you interfere with fairy property such as a fort or a fairy path or a bush like that, there are consequences. And the consequences where you're building a road such as a motorway where there will be an immense amount of traffic, well, what might happen? We see enough accidents on roads already, and in Dublin, for example, in the M50, if there's one small pile-up or one accident, there's likely to be a pile-up where God only knows what might happen. Now, we all know that they can happen naturally, and I'm the first believer in coincidence and accidents by all means, but why look for trouble? Why look for trouble, for example, with a thing like that? I often say to people, look, would you go in and desecrate a graveyard? There are plenty of people who do it now, all kinds of mindless people. They're not mindless. They were people who were brought up wrongly, who were given no chance in life. They were the kind of people that if you treat dogs cruelly and don't bring them up, if you bring up dogs, we'll say, kick them, or cats, kick them when they were young and treat them cruelly, you can never really make up the difference later by treating them kindly. It's the very same with human beings. If they're brought up in misery and dirt, filth, without being talked to, without being treated kindly, human beings are complicated creatures, just like animals are. Human beings are only animals, with a little bit more complication, that they can talk and do a few more things than ordinary animals can. But we're still only animals, and if you treat people as dirt from the time they're born, what are you going to expect afterwards? That they'll do the most horrendous things, and they do. You can see it all the way. It's happening now over our own country. There was once a bit of control, social control. That's in many cases gone out the window. I remember a case. It was the case of the Morris Moore murder that John B. Cain wrote The Field about. And that was in 1950. It was in, I'm not sure it was 1956, but it was in the 1950s in County Kerry. And I remember my father taking me to the place when I was young where it happened. You know, it was the talk of the countryside. It was a very kind of twisted. It was about land. That's why John
Yeah, yeah.
B. Cain wrote about the field, about it. And it was everybody was talking about this. People were coming from miles. And that'll tell you how unusual murder was at the time. Look at it today. Look at these things that are happening in Dublin today. You can have somebody shot today for probably €20. Life has become so cheap, partly because of drugs and the rest of it. And you wonder what has happened. Why have people become so desensitized to violence? Why is it because people, like I say, have been brought up to think nothing of each other? Is it because people, I don't know, I just have no answer to that. But social control has broken down in many ways. And people lived in slums in Dublin one time.
Yes.
But still, they had a very strong sense of bond between them, and they'll tell you that themselves.
Yes.
The people who they lived in, we would say, squalor. Fucking 5, 10 people to a room. It was outsiders who called it squalor. They themselves, they were very warm people. They were very, very, strong. They had to be strong to live in places like that. It was the same in Limerick, it was the same in Cork, it was the same in England, it was the same in most places. And then the government built new houses out in Tala and places like that for them. And suddenly things fell apart.
So what happened?
Yes, you'd ask. What? You can only do so much for people. You have to let people do something for themselves too. You can't take away people's own sense of we want to do something because we need to do something and we need our family to do something. And you social something has broken down in Ireland, and you can see it very, very sadly now. Old beliefs have gone. Beliefs, we're not going to be maudlin or sentimental about it. Even folklore is changing constantly. Things don't stand still. I don't like this thing of new books coming out about the 1950s, the good old times that were. That's nonsense. The good old times very often weren't good old times at all. There were times of slavery and hardship, and especially for women. They were not good old times, but people look back as if the sun always shone warm in the summer. That's only seeing things through a lovely haze. But folklore is still alive and well. People in 40 years' time will look back on us, I presume, when cars will be flying, or when they'll be looking back and the stink of fumes that we lived through. Like when pollution was rife, and maybe things will be better, maybe things will be a lot worse. Who knows? And they'll be thinking, weren't we desperately stupid people to be using whatever we're using now?
Yes.
Just as we look back on people then, and some of the things that they were using, which was slavery, and some of the things that they were using then, which was very good. Time doesn't stand still for anybody. But there were lots of things that were beliefs then, there were good beliefs, and they kept people within reason.
Would you say that was the church that did that?
Sometimes, yes. And believe you me, Irish people are wonderful to kick a man when he's down.
They are.
Oh, wonderful to kick a man when he's down. The church did good things as well as bad things. The church provided free education, free hospitals. Nowadays, billions are going into the health service, billions literally. And has it made it wonderfully better? I'm a little bit doubtful. Look at the nuns. They're the ones who founded a lot of these hospitals, the Bon Secours, the this, that and the other hospitals. But of course they were giving their time free. There's a lot of these wonderful specialists now who are making $500,000 a year, and it isn't enough for them. They're on a public contract and they're doing their private patients outside. there's a terrible, terrible, terrible sense of greed now in Ireland. You see, it's always the case. Put a beggar on horseback and he'll ride to the devil. We are a nation that had nothing. And all of a sudden we've come into riches, and you know what will happen when people come into riches too quickly. Bye-bye. He'll ride till the arse falls out of his trousers. And then, oh, please, his three hands will be out looking for alms. And that's what, of course, happened, you know, with the crash, with the property crash and everything else. I didn't do it, please help me. After, it was your fucking fault. You're the one who went looking for the huge loans. You're the one who did. There's a lot of people during all of that who didn't spend every fucking bit of money they had. And they then have to pay the price for all these other bollockses who broke the fucking bank, having 5 holidays a year, going to New York, spending loony sums of money, going to buy apartments in Bulgaria. Exactly. Why should I pay, or you pay, or whoever pay for all these crazy people? You know, it makes.
So we lost the run of ourselves then.
Absolutely, lost the run of ourselves 25 times over. Not all people did. An awful lot of people did.
The gatekeepers.
Well, I would say then, look, like Judge Judy often does, you're stupid, take the fucking consequences. Like she says, get a job, get 2 jobs, get 3 jobs to make up for what you've done. Get 4 jobs if you have to. Take the fucking consequences. Stop looking, stop whinging, stop whining. Go do something. That's why the dole absolutely fucked up this country. The dole made people lazy. Look, you go out there every single day and there's work to be done. You see it at the side of the roads. There's bushes to be cut. You see signposts now covered with bushes. And you're going along in a car and you say, what the hell, where am I going? Because half of the signpost is covered with bushes and people idle. I say people are on the dole. I'm not saying withdraw the dole. I'll say have people working. Don't have people idle. Pay them extra. Pay them extra. But have people on the fucking dole while there's work to be done. That's madness. And the old people that that's my job, interviewing old people all the time. They will tell you that when times were bad, that the drains were always kept open. Rivers were never, you could fish in rivers. No, you can't fish in any rivers. They're all blocked in by foliage, drains. And nowadays there's machinery to do all this work.
Yes.
And nobody is doing the fucking work. All that fellas had long ago was shovels and spades, and the work was being done. Now, fellas are so fucking lazy that nobody is working, and nobody wants to work. Fellas are sitting above in machines and their bellies hanging out over the fucking door because they're so... fellas aren't even walking now. And you can see that. Look at all the fucking people going around with their bellies hanging out over their belts. And women too.
I want to take, actually, I hadn't intended to go this route, but what you're saying ties in a little bit with what you called the Americanization of Halloween. So this seems like the
Americanization of Ireland.
Of everything. In Ireland.
Everything. Even the way... look, the little boy there.
Yes.
That you saw when you came in. I was dangling a sweet over him there inside while he was on the big phone, as he calls it, the old tablet. And he playing games. And I sometimes listen to those fucking games. And the American accent, and then every fucking 5 minutes or so, advertising.
By this.
Oh my God almighty, the brainwashing of little children, and it keeps them quiet. And occasionally I'll just into his ear, I'll say, look, I won't say call him by name at all, I'll just and just to belch into his ear for the crack to see could I get his information or his attention. Not a hope. You could fart at him and he wouldn't even hear you. That is how awful these things are. And other people would say, isn't this fantastic? These are baby minders. They're not. They're insidious, horrible things. They are horrible things. And if teachers could only see this, they'd be out of a job in the morning. because there'll come a day where you won't even need a teacher. You'll just put in these in front of children in school, and the dummies, the dumb ones, will be with their mouth open, just like adults are now with televisions in pubs. And I always start my story sessions with, just for fun, but not fun. Long ago, when you came into a kitchen at night, if you couldn't do something, tell a story, recite, play an instrument, sing a song,
Yes.
you'd be caught by the scruff of the neck and the hasp of the arse and out the door. You were only using up good air, you were only taking up space. Get out, you were no good. And people today be wondering, what should people long ago, what had they to do for the dark part of the year, which, remember, is nearly 6 months, October to March, Ireland, but nowadays people don't see that because it's all electrified. But long ago, when there was no electricity, you had 6 dark months of the year, and what did the old people do? And of course what they did was they entertained themselves. And they did, and they were good at it. Whereas nowadays people are stupid. Nowadays people are stupid because they're surrounded by television, and just today the people are with their mouths open, because there they are, even in a pub today, where you should be able to entertain yourself with talk, which was what pubs were, public houses where you could go in and meet the public. Television here and that place, television there and that wall, television, and once again, for the likes of me who have no earthly interest in sport, every feckin' channel has sport on, usually a stupid game like soccer, which is the most boring of boring games. Yeah, just over here, over back, and if you're looking in 90 minutes in a soccer
90
game,
minutes.
90 minutes, you might get 1 goal. I mean, how could you justify wasting an hour and a half for some fucking stupid thing like that, watching idiots who get paid more than the Prime Minister of a country, with their hair oiled and they're diving for this and diving, and then when they get a goal, they're sliding down the pitch for their adoring fans. Talk about fucking idioting, when you could be doing something. You've only so many hours in your life, and to spend your life watching these idiots, it mystifies me.
Well, Marx called religion the opioid of the masses, and nobody said.
And it is.
But this is the other form of it.
And it absolutely is. And you can see today that if there was another Hitler come the way, or another Stalin, or Joseph Goebbels, or any of these, he would have such an easy task. When you see pop concerts, are the same thing. You see all of them. You look at it sometimes, these pop concerts especially, and you're thrown back again to Hitler's great gatherings with all the guys with their arms up. And it's frightening, because there is a great similarity between the two things. Frightening. So, I mean,
we're not as clever as we might think. I think that sums up.
Not. Absolutely not. At least the old people, without all of that modern paraphernalia, call it what you like, of control that this new stuff gives the possibility of. They were more confined, yes, in their world, you might say. They hadn't the means of transport, or they hadn't the electricity. In rural areas anyway, the kind of people that I interview, they might seem more simple people, but at least they had the possibility of thinking for themselves. And the old stories that were repeated and repeated and repeated around the fire at night, mainly in the winter time. They hadn't the time for that in the summer because they were busy around the fields and all the rest of it, saving crops and whatnot. They gave a great sense of history, because there were repeated stories and I have found that myself. The old people, and they're nearly all gone now, and it's such a shame. The knowledge from being repeated, it went deep. I get stories, and I have recorded stories about Cromwell.
Wow.
Imagine that. And these weren't out of books. These were stories about how he passed through this particular place and he destroyed that castle. And they could tell you about how the castle was besieged and how the garrison, eventually surrendered and were promptly hanged after being promised their lives. Now, it might have been General Ayrton or whoever did it, but the people still remembered. And where we are now here, right here in this parish, after the Battle of the Boyne, and then the Battle of Aughrim in 1691, which was in East Galway, the remnants of the army of King James, they came on, they couldn't come south to Limerick, where they were heading for. They had to come on there by Slieve which is just there between Clare and Galway, just north of us here. Slieve they call it, but they're only hills, and it was all old heathery bogland, but they came on that way, just here to the north of this parish. And I suppose they were a raggly army that time after being defeated, but there's a lot of strange names around here, names like Foundation. Foundation as a surname, and where would a name like that come from? It doesn't make sense. MacAllan doesn't belong in Clare at all, and of course the name would have come from that army, and other names like it around here. They're not Clare names, they're not really southern names. MacAllan would be a northern name, and they came from that army. People who fell out of the army, probably exhausted, maybe wounded, and they were given shelter by the locals. Then some stayed, probably married into the local families here, and their descendants came right down to our own time. And the army passed through Sarsfield's army. Sarsfield was in charge after the commander was killed.
Yeah.
And they finally came this way and then turned south down along for Limerick. And along the way there are places pointed out where soldiers were killed and buried, and most interesting kind of history, but it was the old people could point out those things. And you could say that I would love to have done more. All I could do was bits and pieces here and there. Luckily only to meet these people and to meet them in time, because they're all dead now. I started recording this stuff in the 1970s when some of these people were still alive and very old at that stage. But they obviously had heard these stories repeated and repeated down along. And now, you see, with the coming of all this technology, and this is the irony, all that has been lost.
Well, you sound angry when you're talking about the toys and the sweets and the iPhones and the tablets and everything. And it's upsetting, I think, for you that we are losing where we came from, or an understanding of where we came from. And is that fair to say? Are we losing that?
Well, of course it is, because if we lose that, who do we become? Who are we then? You have to ask that question. Who are we, or what are we? What we'll become is Americans. We won't become Europeans, sadly, because Irish, we've lost. Irish language.
Yes.
And when you lose a thing, you're not going to get it back. That's the sad thing. English we have. And I'm not making little of English. English is a mighty handy language to have. It's great to have it because it's an international language. And we have an Irish version of it. But we're losing that Irish version of it, which is the very sad thing. Because if people now were to see, I'm very proud of my Kerry version of English, and I would hate to lose my Kerry accent.
Yeah.
But you'll get people in Dublin, especially in RTE and that. That's, that's one of the natives down there. And I say, fuck you. That's, who are you? Who are you? You're only the standard nobody.
Cookie cutter.
Exactly. A standard nobody. Who has to be a nobody to fit in with more nobodies. That's where I don't like, we'll say, the Healy Rays and their politics, but fair dues to them to keep their accent and that.
I get you.
And more people.
Maddie McGrath or someone like that.
Exactly. They are somebody. And you remember Julia O'Freillan's book, Are You Somebody? That kind of thing. You must, if you're not somebody, you're nobody. And that's the way. If Ireland isn't somebody, we're nobody. And with a pressure from America on one side and England on the other, that's what Patrick Pearse and Michael Collins and all of them saw. Lads, keep back, keep back. We have a little space here too, and we're rapidly losing that. Under a terrible pressure from two big pressures on both sides, we are going to lose what we are. And I'm sad to say that RTE, our one chance of what it should be doing, is not. And that's why I resent very, very much paying a licence fee to a crowd like that, who are paying themselves vast salaries for doing nothing.
So what should they be doing?
They should be doing more Irish programmes. No, not Dublin-based programmes. Because when they're just... Now, Dublin has to get its share. But stop giving the couple of token programmes for the natives down on the reservation. Because that's what they do. That's what they do. Because the Dublin ones they don't give the real Dublin people a chance at all. Because there are real, as I would say, real Dublin people up there also. But they give the version of Dublin that, you know, how can I express it? Suburbia Dublin, where, as you put it there a while ago, they are
the Donnybrook.
That kind of thing. It's not a real Dublin. There are real Dublins out there in Dublin that don't ever get a look in from RTE. Never. I don't understand why they don't get somebody who is in charge in RTE who would have a serious look and say, look, there's a Dublin here that is here, because remember, look at all the villages that were in Dublin one time. Donnybrook was one, there was Talla was one, there was, you know perhaps better than I do, but there were many villages in Dublin one time, all with their own separate character, because Dublin is a very, very small city. From most of it you still can see the Dublin mountains, and you're never far from the sea in Dublin. But it has been neglected. Even Dublin has been neglected, and by God, Dublin gets most of what's going.
I get you. So there should be a greater... The rest of Ireland, and Ireland its very self, should be taken more seriously.
Absolutely. It's. I tell you, TJ Cahart gets much more respect than RT1 or 2. Much more respect because they're much better. Much better, and I think that only for TG Cahar, I think the Irish language would be in a lot more serious case, because, all right, they have subtitles, but so what? They put on better stuff, and the subtitles do get noticed because people will be hearing Irish while they're following the subtitles, no matter what, and that does help. It'll help with pronunciation, if nothing else. So they have done something for Irish. But I'm afraid, look over Christmas, look at the rubbish that RTE showed.
Really?
It was terrible. It was terrible. It's all second-hand shite and repeats.
Films and things, or what was it?
Oh, I mean, look at the repeats they showed of Brendan Grace. It had been showed only 2 weeks ago. I mean, I didn't watch much of it anyway. And the Late, why haven't they killed off that fucking programme 10, 15 years ago? I mean, they have dragged it out and out. I haven't watched the Late for 25 years. But what is it only a selling thing for? And there's one for everyone in the audience, or this, whoever is on it now, is appearing at the theatre, whatever. It's only a selling device. Come on.
I think you'd go mad if you weren't somewhere like East Clare. Do you know, where you're not... Do you have a little bit of authenticity here, maybe that you mightn't find in...
No, not at all, because there's no value in Clare on stories. No.
So tell me about different... If in Eddie Lenihan's mind, let's say Dublin is... I don't know if it's fair to... I don't want to put words in your mouth, but let's say Dublin is more tarnished or diluted or something than where? Where still has the essence?
Clare is no good for stories.
Okay.
I would be rarely if ever asked to tell stories in Clare.
Really?
Cork is very good. I'll be even in 2 days' time now going to Cork for the first session almost of the new year. Cork very good Galway is good. I'm asked to tell stories in Galway quite often. Limerick, yes. Louth, yes. Wexford, yes. A scattered various other places in Clare, no. Funny enough.
That is funny that you've been here for 40 years.
Yeah. And practically all of the stories I would tell are, I don't tell any stories that come out of books. I tell stories that I've collected myself from old people, and practically all of the stories I would tell would be from old people in Clare, and yet I would be asked practically never to tell stories in Clare.
Wow.
Strangely.
I have heard that there has been an effort in UCD to record some folklore and keep some sort of emphasis on that tradition. Has that effort been maintained, or is it kind of is it struggling, or
That I don't know. That I could not tell
But let's talk, like, say the work that you're trying to do, which is, let's say, recording stories, keeping the tradition alive. Is that being done by anyone other than you? And is this going to... When Eddie Lenihan goes, who's going to take up that mantle? Do you feel like you're working alone, like?
I do, because I have never had any contact from UCD
Okay.
about what I do. I depend completely on my own resources here for what I do. When I say that, the resources, the stories I have collected over the last 42 years. I don't go to the UCD archive, at all for any material.
Okay.
Because I prefer not to have to get permissions like naturally you would there, and I'm sure there's no problem there because it's a public archive. It's not belong to UCD. It was collected publicly down the years at public expense, but I prefer to be able to do what I've done myself and go through that stuff from people I know. An awful lot of them dead now, naturally, because they were all old people when I collected from them. For example, Meeting the Other Crowd now, that book on the Fairies, which is now in its 13th edition and has been translated into Japanese and Italian. I'll do another volume of that because I have the material for it, and there were a couple of old people there that I promised I would put their stories into a second volume of it, and they were anxious to see their stories published. If they live now to see them published, I hope they do, because a couple of those people are in their 90s now. So as soon as I'm finished the next book, which I have to have done for June, Military Memories, I'll start then on volume 2 of Meeting the Other Crowd. So I have enough to be doing.
Yeah.
That's the difficulty you see about doing a book, is that you have to have time straight in front of you to get down and do it, and the telling of stories is a constant interruption, which is a great complaint. But in another way it isn't, when you're trying to do two very different things. The telling and the writing, never mind the collecting. But my collecting has gone down a lot this past year.
Really?
It has. Because I have no transport now. I'm not driving at the moment. And in a place like this you have to have a car.
Of course.
You have to have a car, because a lot of the people that you want to collect stories from are living in, as I would say, Artany Irgulda.
What does that mean?
Backward places,
Oh, yeah.
off of the main line, so you have to have a car whether you like it or not.
What you do, the telling of stories, is something that has happened organically. It is something that has gone on for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
And what you seem to be recognising is a need for that to be maintained, and it seems to have suffered something of a rupture. Whether it's globalisation or Americanization or whatever it is, or great wealth that we've enjoyed over the last few years, and we've lost maybe an appreciation of the things that you appreciate. I want to know, where do you see this tradition in 20, 30, 40, 50 years? Will there be any seanchaithe? Is that the right pronunciation? How do you pronounce that? After you?
Well, I'm not the only person now, in fairness, who's trying to do this, because a group of people there started a number of years ago, Storytellers of Ireland. I never joined it. I don't think any of them collect stories. Some of them tell much wider, they tell stories from Persia, they tell stories from different cultures. I prefer not to do that.
Okay.
Because of what I do. I prefer to keep it strictly to Irish stories because of what I have been doing, collecting stories from Irish people. So I prefer to keep it to what I know best. Irish legends, mainly. I don't tell the long stories either, the Cuchulainn and the Red Branch Night stories, except where I may have heard, and the very few of them have I heard. One or two, yes, and a couple of the Fionn McCool stories, because you don't hear them now. They're too long. People wouldn't listen to them. And that brings up another thing. People's ability to listen has shrunk amazingly. The only place nowadays that you'll get the ability of people to listen to a long story is at a storytelling festival, or a session that I might do specifically where stories are the thing. For example, I was last month at a place in Cork where I was the only person there, and that's what was advertised, that I was there for stories for 2 particular nights, and it was a wonderful session. It was full both nights, and there were people that couldn't get a ticket. I was very sorry for them, but there was nothing I could do because the tickets were, sold in advance. You had to have a ticket to get in, and it was a tremendous session. And people could listen. The people who were there were able to listen, so that I was able to tell longer stories for a change. Because you see, under normal circumstances, and especially in tourist sessions during the summer, you have to keep the story short for variety's sake. Because lots of the people who come here as tourists wouldn't be used to stories at all.
No.
And they certainly wouldn't be used to Irish stories. Some of them would be from quite different cultures. A lot of them American. And a lot of the Americans would be used to television only, rather than told stories. So the best thing for them is to keep the stories reasonably short. You might have an hour to do what you're doing, or maybe 50 minutes, or get in 5 stories in 50 minutes, or thereabouts.
Okay.
And the problem there is, if you keep doing that all the time, you get into the habit of it, and it's not a good habit to get into, because then you become unfit yourself to tell longer stories. Because the longer stories, a story an hour long, well, a story like that takes a bit of remembering.
And that's where the meaning is, isn't it? You lose some of the story if it's cut down to 10 minutes, or if there's 5 of them in an hour.
Yes.
So you tell stories of people's experiences with the fairies, or is it the other people? What's the nickname? The other people.
Well, the other crowd.
The other crowd.
Yes.
And I'm very curious to hear, what are your experiences with the other crowd, or that you think might have been with the other crowd? Do you mind sharing? Is there one experience that you can remember that sticks out?
Well, there's only one that I have had personally, that, and I won't say that it was 100% with them, but it's one that very much I remember. I was driving to work in Limerick one morning, and that's a while ago now, when I was driving, and I was there near Bunratty Castle, this side of it. It was the old road then before the motorway was built, and there's a house there, still the very same today as it was then, and a big lawn, or you could say a small field in front of it. And as I was passing traffic, I was anxious to get to school in time, and at that time you'd have to start out early. It would nearly take you an hour and a bit to get to Limerick. Nowadays it only takes you half an hour with the new road. But I was passing this house and field, and whatever look I gave to the side, there in the middle of the field was this huge black dog, as big as a pony. It was a dog, and I looked again, gone. No, I had to keep going, and did. And when I arrived at school, one of the teachers said to me, "What's wrong with you? Must have noticed something." And I said, "I'll tell you at break time," and I did. And of course they all thought it was hilarious, you know. They said, "You were on the piss last night." I said, "I wasn't." I said, "What I saw." I said, "What I saw, I saw." And I looked several times, other mornings or evenings, saw nothing. But there was an old man that I used to call to there, very nearby. He's dead since, the poor man, but a very interesting man. Several of his stories are in the black book there, Meeting the Other Crowd. Most intelligent man, and a man obviously who had listened to the old people before him, because he knew all of that area around there, and plenty of stories about it. I'd say about 70 hours of him on tape.
Wow.
But we were in there one evening. I called him on the way home as usual, and we were chatting about this and that. I used to always bring my recorder anyway to him, because he always came up with something new. But we were chatting away this particular evening when I called, and it came down in the conversation. I didn't even bring it up, but it came down in the conversation about the black dog, the Knockan black dog. Knockan is the name of the area. And he said to me that that dog had been seen there for years and years. Back in the 1950s there was a fort, a fairy fort there in that field, and the farmer bulldozed it.
Oh my goodness.
But that huge dog used to be seen there at the outside of the fort, near the road, and never did any harm to anyone. He used to be there just seeing, watching people go by, like a dog, you know, sitting in front of the fire, watching people go by, and nobody ever interfered with him either. You know, the size of him, he was huge, black, and he had been seen for 3-4 generations back, maybe 70-80 years, maybe longer, for all anybody knew. But no dog lives that long, and everybody knew what he was. He was one of them guarding the fort. But I never knew anything about him the morning I saw him. It was only after, like I said, that I found out about him. If I had seen him beforehand, I'd say that, well, but if I had heard about him beforehand, I'd say, well, I might have been imagining it,
yeah.
But I didn't know about it. It was only afterwards I found out about him and the fort. So, I mean, what did I see that morning? I don't know, but I saw it anyway, and I never saw anything afterwards. But a very strange thing here now, right here at the very present time. This very same motorway, now the M18, that passes right here. Out, you probably came on it now.
No, we came. My uncle said we used a long shortcut, so we didn't use it.
Up from Fecal.
Yeah.
Right, but if you had come out from Ennis, of course, and going on to Galway, you'd be passing the M18. When they were building that, just up the road towards Gort, they clipped the fort. They chopped a third of it, just over the Galway border, about 3 miles, 4 miles from Gort. We're halfway here between Ennis and Gort, just halfway. And just over the Galway border, 3 miles up the road, there's a fort on your left. What's the name of it? Doesn't matter. They took a third of it. As you're passing, you'll see it, and you'd know it was a fort, just slightly over the level of the road on the left. And ever since the road was built, there have been accidents after accidents after accidents, an amazing amount of them. Really? on that side, and practically none on this side between Clergy and Ennis. Now, you'd ask yourself why. And I remember I was up here at the shop one day, and an old fella, I know him at all, I know who he was, but he knew me, and obviously he knew my interest in the fairies, because a lot of people do, because of the various television things and the bush and everything down in Flatoon. And the old lad, he said to me, "You see what they did to the fort?" he says, and he says, "Is there a reason for all the accidents?" And he said, "No more." And he just went on about his shopping. So obviously some of the old people have put two and two together and think that what they did to the fort is the cause maybe of so many accidents.
So do you avoid that bit of road?
Oh no. But I would think maybe that it's more than a coincidence that so many accidents. And there was another one there 10 days ago.
Really?
Yeah.
So you talked about, I asked you wrongly about the fort that was around which a diversion was made with the road, with the motorway at the very start of our conversation, and
no, that was below.
You said it was a bush.
Yeah, a bush.
That was down
at Latoon.
Latoon. So can you just briefly describe what's a bush, what's a fort, and what are the various structures that we might see out there, out and about, and how might you identify them?
Well,
for a newbie, you know.
Fairy forts are obvious in the landscape. They're circular, a bank of earth all around, and bushes growing out of that bank of earth, mainly white thorn bushes, because the white thorn bush is always a fairy bush, and mainly a lone white thorn bush. But white thorn bushes on a fort, people are inclined to leave alone, and if one of them even falls through age or a storm or whatever, the old people would never cut it up, never burn it, leave it there to rot where it fell. Now, I've seen recently where younger farmers have cut branches off of bushes in a fort, and I thought that was very unusual. Or have, screwed a fence, electric fence, into a branch. Wow. On a fort. Very unusual. Their fathers probably wouldn't have done that. Yeah. Very unusual indeed, which shows again the weakening of the belief. And the belief in the fairies has weakened, there's no doubt about that. And the proof of that is, a man here came to me recently, very nice man, and he was doing a project about, it's a project that's being done, the man that ate the fort. The man that ate the fort. And I said, of course, I'd help in any way I could. And what it was like the one above there on the main road. Forts that had been damaged by road making. That was an obvious one because I knew about that. But he had a drone and he was able to get a clear picture of them, which was great. And I picked out ones for him that I knew of, using also the 6-inch ordnance map as well as ones I knew of, and wow. Picked out the ordnance map as well because I have the 6-inch ones, all the sheets upstairs for County Clare. And I picked out ones, in a circle that we could do in a day, from here to West Clare and back again. And we did. And it's very interesting, the result we got we found the forts, but when you always have to ask permission from the farmers, that's only a courtesy, and you do that in order to get the best results, because you don't walk into anybody's land that's asking for trouble, and mostly farmers are very helpful when you go about it the right way. They'll 99.9% of them are going to be helpful to you. But what we found was that about 85% of them, the farmers, didn't know the names of the forts anymore. The forts were on the maps. We'll say, just for example, now it's only off the top of my head, Listowel Fort, we'll say, the Black Fort, Listowel Fort, or Cahermoor Fort, and the farmer didn't know the name of the fort. It was like Meehan's Fort.
Did he know it was there?
Oh yes.
Or he didn't know the name?
No. Or he might know it as O'Connor's Fort. He would know it only after the person who owned the land, not the Irish name of the fort anymore, which would be on the ordnance map. But he only knew it as O'Connor's Fort, or Meehan's Fort, or Murphy's Fort. So the link between the thing itself is gradually being lost, because in Lismore, at least to be the big fort, or we'll say Carnagoth, would have been the cat's fort, or Carnagerach, the sheep's fort, or we say Lishin Nagana, which is a lovely name, the little fort of the singing. And that would tell a story. What singing? Why was there singing coming out of this little fort? And there is a whole story. There was singing coming out of this fort. So all of that now, with of course the fading out of Irish and the fading out of other things. Think of that. And Murphy's Fort.
I know, you lose it all.
You're left with nothing.
Yeah.
And we found that out in practically all of them. And someone would even have to get at, because they had become so overgrown, we could hardly see the very fact that they had been chopped off by the making of a road way back.
Wow.
Way back. But this is a new one, and that was very interesting to be able to see that by the chopping off of the motorway. And the other thing is how well the crowd in charge of the roads, what you call them, the DNA, what's they call them, the motorway authority, anyway, what I'm talking about, the motorway authority of the NRA, the National Roads Authority. How well they were able to get permission to chop a fort, whereas if a farmer did that, no, he'd end up in jail. So the motorway crowd can do anything they like. Which isn't right either.
No, well, you stopped them. I like how you didn't like the word campaign. Let's call it the resistance that you put up. Do you mind me going back to that?
No.
And what did that resistance look like?
I was only trying to enlighten them.
It was successful, wasn't it?
I was only trying to enlighten them that, look, here is something that is in the landscape. They didn't even know about it. Because you see a fairy bush or a lone bush like this, 9 times out of 10 doesn't appear on an ordnance map. A few of them do. If it's a saint's bush, like the famous one above in Clonmacnoise, might then, but a fairy bush isn't acknowledged, so that won't appear there. I knew about this one from some local old people, and they said to me, if that's not, there's going to be accidents here, and people are going to lose their lives. So I wrote in a letter to the Clare Champion, which they printed, and I got on to Clare FM, the radio, and they gave me a hearing. And I wrote to the Irish Times, they printed the letter, and luckily what did the job was that the Dublin correspondent of the New York Times, he saw the letter, and he printed a quarter of a page on the thing.
In the New York Times?
In the New York Times. Now I suppose maybe he thought this was a kind of a Paddy Leprechaun thing, I don't know whether he did or not, but he printed the quarter page, and that was syndicated in newspapers across America. And then, of course, the fun started because the BBC television came, and French television came, and Belgian television came, and various Scandinavian television crews came, and then the NRA couldn't exactly demolish the bush. That have looked very stupid. And what they did instead was they went around the bush, you know, from a couple of miles back. They gradually just varied the road slightly around the bush, and there it is today, survived.
Still there?
Oh yeah, and it has become a tourist attraction. But some bollocks came shortly afterwards and cut every branch off of it with a chainsaw.
Really?
Some fucker came by night.
I have to wonder, why would someone do that?
You would, I presume, to the man, because women usually don't do things like that. It was some idiot. But the interesting thing was, one of those old men that I had got the information from, he said, I remember very well, he said to me, where is he now? That was his summing up of it. Where is he now? He had no doubt about, you don't do things like that without consequences. It'd be interesting. Which was an evil kind of an act. Bad-minded. Again, like those kind of people who desecrate graveyards and break headstones and that. You know, what was he trying to prove? But he came back in all its glory. He was only pruning it, you could say. He came back and has come back there now in the month of May. You can see it with all the flowers on it, and it looks beautiful.
On the bush?
Yeah.
Wow.
Standing out because it's the only bush there down in the hollow between the two carriageways.
Wow.
It stands out beautifully.
You mentioned leprechauns, and I've heard you talk about Halloween, and I've also heard you talk about Walt Disney's depiction of the fairies.
Yes.
With the little wings and all that. So I want you to try and describe who are the fairies, what are they? For someone who, like any person, naturally would just picture the Walt Disney thing, who doesn't know all the things that you know. So what does that look like? Who are they? Where are they?
I remember an old man, he only died last October. October 12 months. And he was just a couple of weeks short of 100 years of age. And another one of those old men that I have about 100 hours of recorded. I knew him for about 30 years, a most knowledgeable man. And you couldn't get to the end of what he knew. I was there, I think the night before he died in hospital. But he met the fairies, he said, and I had no reason to disbelieve him. And of course, I asked him, it was the first question you would ask a person, what they look like. And I can remember the pause he made. And he said to me, the person sitting beside you could be one of them, and you wouldn't know it. He said, they're the very same as ourselves, he said. The very same as ourselves. Except for one thing. He said they're paler than us. Because he said, you see, they have no red blood in them. And that figures because the stories that you would hear about how they came to be, there's logic in all of them. You see, that's the thing about the Irish folklore. The stories told about these serious things, there is logic. Some of the stories might be funny, but behind all the joke, such as that the fairies are the angels that were thrown out of heaven. And it is a very, very funny story. But when you think about it afterwards, the angels aren't human. And that is a Christian story, alright. But the angels aren't human, so they could have no red blood. Their blood is as I've heard it from other old people that saw where they were, the fairies themselves, fighting the night before because they're mighty sportsmen, it seems. They play hurling especially, and fiercely, and by God you'll bleed when you're in that game. Well, you'll bleed even when you see it played between Tipperary and Kilkenny. But they don't leave any red blood. Their blood, as I had it described by one old man, is greenish, palish. He saw it in the ground. So they don't have red blood like a human being, but they want to get back into heaven. They were thrown out of heaven for pride, the sin of pride, like Lucifer and his followers, and they want to get back. They want to, because where they were thrown out into couldn't compare with above, they want to get back. But how? And the only way they can get back into heaven is, hopefully, maybe, by pretending to be human, by disguising themselves as human. So that leads to the story of changelings. If they can get a drop of human blood in their veins, they might be able to fool whoever is in charge of the gate above. Look, I have a little bit of human blood, I'm human. Of course it'll never work, I mean, it is a forlorn hope. But if you want to get back to what was your home, heaven, you'll try anything. And that's how they used to explain changelings long ago, which I suppose if you want to explain what a changeling really was it somebody who was dying of TB or cancer? But the old people didn't believe that. The old people believed that if somebody was fading away, it was somebody who was being carried by the fairies. And that was the theory behind it, that it was the fairies looking for somebody to disguise their own, trying to get back into heaven. But there was ways of preventing it. I knew an old man in Doolin who said that up to the age of 10, his grandmother would never let him out in the evening without making the sign of the cross on his forehead with piss. And we thought, what the hell, was she out of her mind? But of course she wasn't, because there's 7 things that the fairies are afraid of. Something holy, as you would guess. Something dirty, they're very clean. Something red, the colour of blood. Even though they need it, they're still afraid of it, because I suppose they're afraid of the fact that will it work when they face heaven or not, will, frighten. Something red, iron or steel, salt, fire and running water. The fairies can't cross running water. So, the old lady wasn't crazy. She was giving him double protection. Something holy, something dirty.
Wow.
So they had their own beliefs, the old people, and if people today think they were out of their minds, they weren't. There was a logic to all of these things under their way of thinking.
So they came from. Do you subscribe to that story where they fell from heaven?
Oh, that's
is
one version.
Is that one version? What's your version?
The other version, you see, was the Tuatha Danann and the Milesians and all of that. That was the other version, that they were one of the tribes that were thrown with the various invasions of Ireland, and that they were the ones that were thrown underground.
Okay.
I was never told that fully. That was mentioned to me in the various tellings that I had from old people, but I never heard the full telling of that, which makes me think that was a story that was taught at school. It was never a story that was told round the fire at night, whereas the angel one was.
So they were up in heaven.
Yes, they were in heaven, and the devil, he wasn't the devil then, he was the Lucifer. He was the proud one, wondering what would it be like to be sitting in God's chair, and he waited until God went out to the jacks. That was the funny part of it, you see. It was a very funny story, and because, you see, Irish people had a great sense of humour about their religion as well as about heaven and hell. But he waited until God went out to the bathroom, the Tachanasel as they would call it, and when God went out, Lucifer jumped into his chair. All the ones who were below, the angels and the rest of them, whoever was in the golden chair had to be adored and adored. Why didn't I do this before? But he had forgotten one thing, that God would be coming back. And when God came back, pulling up his trousers, saw who was in his chair, clapped his hands, and the floor of heaven opened. Down went the chair, and Lucifer in it. And down went thousands of the ones that were around also, like the stars of heaven. Down they went, down, 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 into the place below, the dark place. But Michael the Archangel was over in the corner making the tea, standing on a rafter. And he said, Master, he says, do something quick, or we'll be here alone. Oh, you're right, says God. And he clapped his hands again, and everything froze. But by then, of course, it was too late for Lucifer. Himself and the chair were gone down, down, down into the pit. And the ones nearest to him, down also, where they are today, he, the devil, and they, the devils. But the ones that were still falling when God clapped his hands, stopped. And the ones that were falling through the air, they today are the air fairies. The ones that had fallen to earth, into the forts and places like that, today they're the earth fairies. And the ones that had fallen into water, lakes, rivers, they today are the water fairies. And that's how our ancestors, who were poor people, Ireland was a poor country at that time, there weren't many books or whatever, that's how they explained the difference between the devils and the fairies of various degrees. They weren't stupid people, they were curious-minded people, but they just hadn't the education. And the other thing was, they had a great sense of humour. They had a great sense of humour about their religion as well, as they sat around the fire there at night in the dark weeks and months of the year. I mean, consider now, Michael the Archangel above in the rafter in heaven making the tea. Yeah. I mean, tea wasn't in Ireland until the 19th century. So they were funny people. They had to be, because the rent had to be paid to the landlord twice a year. You had to have something to distract you. Tough times. But they were good people, mainly the Irish people, given any fair chance of law and the rest of it. And by God, there wasn't much good chances under the law at the time. There was not.
Eddie, do you mind me asking you, do you go to Mass on a Sunday?
And I will be at 6:30 because we are going to a different church that we were never at all this Sunday, up in Ra. I was never in that little church, tiny little church. I'm going there this Sunday.
Why is that?
This Saturday evening. I just want to see it. I've never seen it. So it's above in the parish of Ra.
So there's a constant battle in a lot of stories that I've heard you tell between the priest and the people telling the fairy stories, and there's a bit of snobbery or something, and also condemnation. I remember you also telling the story of Biddy Early being condemned from the pulpit, and that kind of thing. The black dog, where the priest says, you fellas are talking nonsense, when they come and say they saw the black dog blocking the bridge. So
that's correct.
Those two schools of thought or worldviews or traditions come into a clash or something. So how do you feel that dynamic in your own life? Are you ever torn between your Catholic practice and your fairy beliefs?
Not a bit in the wide world. Not a bit in the wide world, because and it was the very same with the older people. The old people, what did I say? Ireland was one of those countries where the two things, fairy belief and Catholicism, went right comfortably together. Very comfortably together. Especially Catholicism. Catholicism and fairy belief went no problem at all together, and there would have been no priest, I think, that would have contradicted that because he would have known automatically that people would have taken no notice of him. They would have taken he wouldn't have done it anyway, because most priests came from exactly the same background as the people that they were talking to in their congregation. And he would have known that he would have been ignored. So I never heard of a priest talking ill of the fairies for that reason. It was quite different with Protestant ministers. I think the majority of them would have regarded the fairies with not suspicion, but just as superstition. That kind of stuff would only be regarded as superstition. There were obviously the exceptions, but I think most of them, since Protestantism was from the Bible, I think the Bible probably wouldn't approve of things like that.
So then when you talk... Sorry, go on.
Whereas Catholics didn't read the Bible much. There's a few very, very funny stories. My uncle, he was a great funny man to tell stories. He was. I'm so sorry I didn't get more of him, but I got enough, and he was so funny. He was a parish clerk, and he used to tell great stories against the clergy. But he had stories, I think, that showed up what I might say were... No, he wasn't a great man for stories about the fairies as such, but he showed up what the clergy thought in a funny way.
Yeah. In
a funny way. And of course, it is nice to get the funny side of the clergy and then the serious side that you're talking about there. And the funny side, of course, of the clergy is often forgotten about, because people at that time, they feared the clergy a lot. They didn't see the funny side of the clergy. You know, the clergy were very often sent for, you know, when people were in trouble. We'll say when somebody was dying, at the time of when confirmation, marriage and all these things, all right, there was nothing unfunny about marriage and those kind of things, but there were serious kind of occasions at the same time. But my uncle had very funny stories about the clergy as human beings, because he saw them, being a parish clerk, he saw them as human beings. And I was very lucky to hear those kind of stories, because I eventually will do a book, The Power of the Priest. And it's a kind of a book that needs to be done, because nowadays, as I mentioned back along there, that there's a lot of misunderstanding about the power of the church. People are inclined to stand in the church because of the faults of a few. But people are inclined to forget, you see, that a good 97% of priests did a good job, and nuns too. And it's not fair to blame all the bad things done on the majority who did their best, because remember, it's a lonesome enough life. I always think to myself that the two most lonesome kind of lives you can have are priests and guards, because they belong nowhere. You're transferred and transferred and transferred at the whim of somebody else. And for especially guards' children, you know, it's tough on them. You know, where do they belong? They have only friends made when their father and mother could be transferred to another barracks again. No, it wasn't so bad on priests from that point of view. But I have questioned priests on some occasions about something in the parish. No information. No information. When you would expect that they might. And the reason is obvious. They haven't been there long enough to know anything of the history of the place. So, I mean, it's it's a difficult enough one to. But my uncle was great at that. He very often he took the piss out of priests, and they never resented it. They always enjoyed the crack. Yeah, it's a funny one. It's a sad one, really. It's a really sad one. Even though the stories were funny, behind it all, yeah, there was an element of sadness, and I appreciate it nowadays.
Yeah.
Now that my uncle is dead, and a lot of the priests he tells about are dead, and that's why the clergy used to enjoy poker games and such thing, and they used among themselves. It gave great sense of solidarity and a bit of social, and I think that's why Father Ted, the comedy thing, is still so popular, and there is an element of that in it. I think an awful lot of Irish people, more than English people, see that series as something. They still have the old gra for the clergy, whereas English people don't understand half of what's in that series. English people, for example, get the a thing English people don't understand at all, for example, is this thing about relics and saint this and saint that. To them, that's complete mystery. Utter mystery. Irish people still do about relics and all of that, because they were brought up with that. English people have no clue about that. Notion. I know that because I've often watched English people watching that series.
Yes.
And to them, there's a laugh about the relics and that, and the third class relic. But I think the people who made that put in that as a laugh at English people. The third class. Should I know such thing as a fucking things like that,
So when you talk about Biddy Early being condemned by the church, was she seen as a threat or something, or what was going on there?
Biddy Early was only condemned by the local parish priest. She wasn't condemned by the clergy in general at all. Okay. She was only condemned by a particular parish priest. What's that his name was again? Father. But by and large, the clergy, I think, didn't. A lot of the clergy went to her. They even said that the Bishop of Limerick went to her under disguise. But most people knew who was there when they saw the coach and all. They knew damn well that this was no ordinary person. No, an awful lot of, well, I said that in the book, an awful lot of priests did go to her. Yeah. Look, and for the simple reason, they had their problems too. And if Biddy maybe could help, they went. But certainly the parish priest of Fecal was against her. And it was made clear, the pact, that at the end, when the last came and when she was dying, the priest did come. She handed over the bottle, and at the other thing of the clergy, when she stuck the horse to the road, that the most popular story of all about her and the clergy, it seems in at least one of the versions of the story that herself and that priest became very good friends afterwards. Wow. So maybe it was that he realised that Biddy was just trying to teach him a lesson, and he, being a young man, when he got a bit more mature, he did realise that.
Well, can you tell me about the new book that you're writing? We were talking about it yesterday on the phone, and the military history.
Oh, the military one is a follow-up to the meeting the other crowd. When I was going through recently, well, no, not recently, when I was going through the extra material for the Biddy Early book, for the new version of it, because I say I had found her death cert and the death certs of one of her husbands, I decided I'd have to do a new edition of the book. Anyway, I had found a lot of new stories, and I did the new edition. But when I was going through the material that I had for the new stories, I found also an awful lot of stories about various episodes. Obviously I had asked questions all along the way down the years about not just the Civil War or the Troubles, but the First World War and other military things as well. And I was just marked them off, not marked them off so much as the people who had told them to me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I finished the Biddy Early book then, I went back and I found that, oh Lord, I had an amazing amount of these, so I began to transcribe them off of the tapes. And I have about that height of a manuscript now, huge, about 6 inch, 7 inches thick. And I still am getting more. I'm not finished the tapes yet. They're mainly tapes, but not entirely. They're MDs as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll finish soon now, because I could keep going and going and going, because you have to stop somewhere. But literally it goes from Cromwell to before the famine, to various ructions there, right to the land wars of the 1880s, right to up beyond to the White Boys, to the land war, to the to the Boer War, to the First World War, which there's quite a bit on, and then to the Troubles and the Civil War and into the Second World War, and I stopped at the Second World War. I have to. I could have gone further, if I had, because you could come up to the United Nations, but I just don't have the material for that, so I leave it at that, and there can always be another volume later. I could do another one on the Second World War, maybe, and the United Nations, if ever I wanted to.
Wow. And
if I ever got the interviews later. But enough is enough, yes, because there's other books to do. But this, I leave this as not like other, what would I say, oral histories have been, which have depended hugely on documentary stuff as well. I leave this just like Meeting the Other Crowd, without documents. I leave this as literally an oral history. Put it in, and only put in between, just like Meeting the Other Crowd, in between the oral bits from these people, I'd put what would I say?
Footnotes or something?
No, not footnotes, but little interjections by myself to put it in context, each one.
Gotcha.
Each one. And maybe this time I will at the back put footnotes, all right, just who told me this precisely, and when they told it to me, and their age and their address.
As you said to me yesterday, the documents are only as good as the people who wrote them.
Oh, that's all. That's all. I've always maintained that the documents are fine, but they're only as good as the people who wrote them. The proof of that, for example, would have been in the Biddy Early book. I got documents for this edition. No, that's scanty enough, because they were mainly newspaper reports. But you could tell from the newspaper reports about Biddy and, for example, her last marriage, that the reporter had never been near Biddy Early. It is reported that an old woman has married a young man. She is reputed to be among the peasantry a healing woman. That kind of. It is reputed that she. You know damn well that he was never next or near her. So, what value is that kind of a report, even though it is a newspaper report, and that you have the date, and just from the Limerick Journal of August 1860, whatever.
You need to be there.
You need to be there. It's a second-hand report. So even though we'll say for the military memory kind of thing, it may have been from the what did I call them? The military reports that were collected by the whatever department it was, I think it was the Department of Defence, was it, in the 1950-ish, from the people who survived the Troubles. They collected personal documents from them. They're all available anyway. You can tell that some of them are very good. They're telling their own story, what they did at the time, but you can tell with other ones that they're telling the story to suit themselves, to bring out their own particular side of it, to suit, well,
an agenda or something.
Well, yeah, to make themselves look good. And as an old man below in Limerick told me, he's still alive too, he's 90 something, very good, excellent. I've recorded him several times. His father was in the killing of a very, very prominent official, but he showed me one of these documents, these military documents that he got a copy of, his father, and he said to me, sure, that man, he was bringing the two sides. As he says, he was bringing the two sides. He was working for the British and he was working for the Irish at the same time. So I mean, in a file like that, could you believe the man? So, you know, written documents are only as good as what?
The person is doing it.
Well, that's it. You see, you can't always believe them, and some historians will swear by little written documents that they are the be-all and the end-all of. They're not. They're not. A spoken interview can be every bit as good, but written historians don't always believe that. And I think that the written thing is number one. And they should always be treated with caution, because it's only the person who wrote it. Well, you have to be cautious.
When I'm in America, you often hear, or if you went to America, you'd often hear about members of the military or military families, and we thank our people who are serving far afield, and there's a great pride in the armed forces in America.
Oh yes.
We don't seem to have that here, but why do you take such an interest in that? Do you have a connection yourself?
None whatsoever. Well, no, I'm wrong there.
We do have a strong history, you know, but still, we're not going around saluting the flag, do you know?
We don't have to. We don't have to. I mean, you don't have to be... if you do, there's something wrong with you. I mean, if you have to be putting your flag on your stamps and in front of your house and in front of, you know, on your bloody team jersey, I think it shows an insecurity. Thanks be to God we don't have that here. You know, we're secure enough in ourselves, I think. I think the Americans are a little bit insecure about themselves, maybe from their civil war. I don't know from what. They shouldn't have to be, because they're a big power. They shouldn't have to be trying to prove anything. It's, I think, a pity. I think it's a pity, because to outsiders it doesn't prove anything extra about them. It's, well, I don't know, but I just say thank God we don't have to do that here. It's nice to see flags over public buildings, and leave it at that.
Yeah.
Leave it at that.
So what are you were going to say you had a connection, or why do you have this interest?
My mother's two uncles served in the British Navy.
Okay.
During the Second World War. And that was nice, but that was only because they couldn't get a job here. One of them, he applied for the Irish Army and the British Navy on the one day. And the British Navy came up. And so he decided he'd take it, and he did, and he was delighted that he saw the world. He served on many ships. He did indeed, and the other man, he also did, but he joined the Canadian Navy after the war, and he finished up in Canada. That was the only connection. My father's family, none of them ever served in any of the military. Most of them went to America and died there, San Francisco.
So when will that book be published?
I have a deadline for the middle of next year. By God, I'll be lucky to make it. But it is good to have a deadline, though.
Yeah.
You know, that's why I have to stop now. But the worst of it was the transcribing of the recordings. That's the really, really slow part.
Okay. So you're supposedly, let's say, finished in June, and when do they start selling it? Like,
Oh,
is that how does that process work? I'm just wondering when can I get it?
well, the slow part is, like I said, there's transcribing.
Yeah.
To get it in, I say they want to have it for the Civil War centenary.
Oh.
Because the Civil War, 22, 23,
Okay.
you know, it takes a while to get the thing sorted out and
Okay.
to get it edited and cover designed and all the rest of that kind of thing. So once they have it, I suppose 22, 23, because you see, everybody was out for 1916 and everybody would be out to see for the other one. It's easy to celebrate the Troubles, but it won't be easy to celebrate the Civil War.
I'm interested.
What side do you take?
Yeah.
People will take sides there, and I have found out, you see, that it is easy to be a Republican because everybody loves the loser. And I found out that practically all the songs, which is a peculiar thing, and I pointed that out to people, and they were saying to me, oh, we never noticed that. Practically all the songs, if not all, maybe not, but practically all the songs were about the Civil War, were Republican songs, praising the Republicans. And the reason, I suppose, is, like I say, everybody loves a loser, and it's easy to be sympathetic to losers.
And the cause.
Oh yes.
Yes.
Yes, like in the North. You know,
you said the Troubles, though. I find that interesting, because we normally think of the North when we think of the Troubles. So
well,
you use that word about, what, 1916 to 1921, or...
Yes. The old people would always call that the Troubles.
Really?
Oh yeah. They wouldn't call this modern thing now at all the Troubles. Oh God, no. They wouldn't have any word for that. Because I don't think the old people down here approved of that at all. At all.
Of that struggle?
Huh?
Of that struggle
Yeah.
Of the likes of the RA and Sinn Féin.
Yeah. I don't think they approved of the thing up north at all. I never got the impression that they did. From all the people I interviewed, I never got the impression from them that they were very quiet about it, we'll say. To them, the Troubles always were the 19, 20, you know, the Black and Tans and all that. That was the Troubles, the troubled times.
I suppose we didn't experience the stuff up north so much down here, you know. So that's probably linked to it.
Oh, very much so. But the ballads and all the songs were Republican, and you'll get rarely any about the Free State, praising the Free State. I don't think I ever got anyone praising the Free State. And it's easy to talk about Republicans, but the Free State had to pick up the tab in a poor country, and then when the whole thing was over and the country was wrecked, bridges blown, railways cut, all the rest of it, who had to pick up the tab and get the country going? Cosgrave's government. Tough number. The country was broke. It's not popular to say that, but they had to do it. And by all accounts, you know, they made a pretty good job of it. But if you say that, you're a stater. That's what I'll be trying to do, you see, with this book, just to take no sides, just to tell it as it is, not tell it, let the old people tell it as it is. And this book will surprise a lot of people, because it shows actually the tans, not all of them were bad at all. Some of them were very kind people. Some of them weren't the bastards that we paint them at all. Some of them were decent men. A terrible amount of the British Army at the time were kind people. Awful lot. In fact, they weren't resented at all. At all. It was a very, very complicated kind of business, the War of Independence. It was not us and them at all. There was a terrible amount of thuggery on both sides when law and order broke down. There was a lot of land disputes and other private disputes being sorted out. All of the volunteers weren't saints like we paint them, and a lot of the other boys on the other sides weren't the villains we paint them. That's what I want to show in this book, and like I say, I want to take no sides, and I'll be trying to make that clear in the introduction. And after that, let the old people tell it as they told it to me. The only problem is, in some cases, I'll have to leave out names. Because, you see, even terrible thing to say, even after 90-something years, it is still raw in some cases, especially Civil War. Terrible, isn't it? Even after practically a century, you can't mention names. Awful. Awful. No.
Right, thanks Eddie.
Okay.
For doing this. We'll wrap it up here. Thank you very much.
No bother at all.
You can go and have your dinner.
I'll have to do something like that. Okay.
You are listening to the Logos broadcast with Fergus James Murphy.